I have the pleasure of introducing Rebecca KLEINMAN, who is one of the most amazing people that you will ever have the privilege of hearing. She is been in the fashion industry for, she'll have to tell you, but it's been over 2 decades, because I've known her for about 2 decades. And so that just, and we met in a professional capacity. We met when she was writing for Women's Wear Daily, and I, in my PR capacity, was pitching to her. And since then, we just clicked automatically as friends as well. And I am so happy to say, have known each other for about 18, 19 years. You know, it feels like our entire lives now, Bex. And Rebecca has written for Nylon, the New York Times, Women's Wear Daily, the Hollywood Reporter, and she is one of the best writers I've ever had the privilege to work with. So I think with that being said, I'm going to let her sort of take over and go from there. So I hope you all have questions ready for later. Bex?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. This is, I think, my 4th lecture for ASU, and I've been with you guys since the beginning of the fashion school, and I'm a huge fan. I actually spend a lot of time in Arizona. I went there for work because there wasn't a national reporter based there who, writes the type of articles I do for a national level. So I picked up a lot of great work there, and that's how I met Danita through the Phoenix Art Museum. I've covered a lot of her exhibits, and I just fell in love with Arizona. Unfortunately, I can't be right there right now because of COVID, but you'll probably see me come through the fashion school in the fall in person. So anyway, so you guys got my bio, and I'll just briefly go over it. I was an English major at Emory University. And like I said in the bio, that was kind of useless when I graduated. So I knew I had to get a master's to actually get a trade where I could have some skills. And I went to Syracuse's Newhouse School for broadcast journalism, because at that time, I thought I wanted to work at CNN or the Food Network. And after being in the TV environment for a while, I realized how much I loved print, because it's just a totally different beast as far as the types of people you work with. I liked working on long format stories versus just the hectic pace of the TV news cycle. And also in print, you can pretty much write about anything. Especially today with online. So I went back to print. And I started at Atlanta Magazine when I was in college. I got an internship. I didn't want to be a journalist or even a fashion journalist when I went to college. I thought I was actually going to go into the Saks Fifth Avenue's fashion merchandising program. And just through going through my college courses, I'm sure you guys are experiencing this right now, it kind of figures out for you what you're good at. And that's the great thing about college and taking all these different classes, is you're good at some stuff, you're bad at some stuff, and then you also figure out your passions. So I just kept doing really well in my English classes. And when you were an English major, you had to pick an internship for your senior year. So I chose Atlanta Magazine, and that ended up being one of my first jobs. They didn't have a fashion editor job, but I was like the fashion writer. And then from there, I went to Atlanta Business Chronicle. And then I finally got a call from WWD, Women's Wear Daily, which I'm sure Danita and Cece have talked a lot about. It's kind of like, it's known as the Fashion Bible. It's over 100 years old. It was a family-owned business for a very long time. And then Condé Nast owned it for a while. And now Penske Media Group owns it. And he's a relatively younger guy in the publishing world. And he has been buying up all these interesting long-term publications like Variety and Rolling Stone and Robb Report. So if you look up the website, you'll see he's been buying at a very rapid pace. And so he's now the current owner of Women's Wear Daily. So I wanted to talk to you guys about why I decided to stay freelance versus go on staff. And I'm sure you guys, when you look at the masthead of magazines and newspapers, when you write for, when you are on staff, you usually have to write about a topic called a beat, and you write about the same beat all the time. So it might be accessories or footwear or jewelry, cosmetics. And I didn't want to write about the same things every day. And because I'm freelance, every day, maybe sometimes twice a day, I'm writing about completely different topics. So it keeps it fresh and interesting to me. And I also don't have to limit to fashion. I mean, I've written about art and architecture and dining and hotels. And I just like the variety. With that said, there are the disadvantages, like you don't have the, benefits like 401k and healthcare. And those are things you just have to think about when you're going into this, like what you really want out of it. For me, it was more about the constant education and kind of like being an eternal student and learning about all these new things. So I wanted to then go on to tell you guys like what my duties are, and keep in mind that I write up about a lot of other subjects besides fashion. But regarding fashion, I don't so much do runway reviews. Like a lot of times when people think of a fashion writer, they think of someone who goes to a runway show and then is a critic. There are actually very few people like that, especially now. There are very few real, authentic fashion critics left. And a lot of times the reviewing is such a small part of this job. So what I specialize in, and this is how I met Cece, because she does public relations for a lot of brands, is I write about wholesale and retail. So that has kept me busy for decades. Oh, and by the way, she forgot to tell you what, I started in 1992. That was my first job at Atlanta Magazine. So that's how long I've been doing this. So like when you do wholesale, that means you're attending trade shows, you're going to huge markets. Like they have huge markets in LA, obviously, New York, Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago. And these are these mega places where people have permanent showrooms. And then also they have temporary showrooms during major markets. And geographically, this is like in Atlanta, where I covered, this would be where everyone in the Southeast and even as far as Chicago would come down and shop for his or her boutique or department store. So you'll get everyone in there from Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus to like a small, tiny boutique, and they're all shopping. So that's the type of stuff I cover. And then I also go to the trade shows like during Swim Week, which is a really exciting time in Miami. I hope you guys get to come to see that at some point. I would definitely make it a priority after COVID when we can travel again. So Swim Week is in July, and it's the largest swimwear market in the world. So people even from Dubai and Harrods in London, which is their really Tony department store, they come all the way to Miami in July, which sounds crazy. Like, why would you want to go there to Miami then? But they're buying the swimwear and the resort wear that you're going to see in stores when you go on your holiday trip in December or your spring break. So I cover all of the runway shows, which last week you heard Christina speak. And so she's putting on the shows, she's producing them, and I'm the person in the front row covering them. And that is a case where I do review shows and talk about trends. And it's a very stressful, important time because first of all, there's only one of me for Women's Wear Daily. So I'm running around like a crazy person because not only do I have to cover all the trade shows during the day, and there are several, and the one called Swim Show, the biggest one that's at the convention center in Miami Beach, that has over 2,500 lines. So you can just imagine I'm looking at all of these lines all day, and then at night I have to go cover the fashion shows, and that might be anywhere from 3 to 6 shows a night. And it's also stressful because people who can't go to swim week are relying on me to tell them what to buy. I mean, think about it. If you're a buyer at a big department store and you have a huge budget and you have to decide, like, are you going to put it all into this certain style, like a bandeau top? It sounds silly, but it's a lot of money at stake. So if I tell them, okay, this color was all over the runways, or this cut of a suit, then it really helps people whittle their buy to make some sound investments. So that's just kind of some of the things I do for that. I wanted to tell you guys some fun things because I've been in this business for so long. So I have to tell you some of the stories that I was the first writer to cover, and you're going to laugh when I tell you some of these. In Atlanta, what is one of the most major fashion brands in the world? And it's based in Atlanta. Do you guys know? It's Spanx. You guys have heard of Spanx, right? So I wrote about, she used to be a comedian, the owner, Sarah Blakely, and she also sold, to make a living, she sold office equipment. And then she had this crazy idea to cut off the feet of her pantyhose, and it became a multi-billion-dollar business. So that's just one of the lines I've written about for the first time. Some other brands that I've written about for the first time that when they came on the fashion scene are Juicy Couture, Trina Turk, Michael Stars t-shirts. And it really was a time of t-shirts and denim explosion in the 90s. So it's interesting to see how much had changed. But like, if you guys go back and watch 90s television, like a show like Melrose Place, you'll see everyone is in a suit. And then there was this major shift to casual wear, even before now's working from home trend. And people started wearing these designer t-shirt and jeans in the California way, though, not like in the 70s designer jeans, like when Brooke Shields was modeling Calvin Klein's. It was a different time. But those are just some of the things I've written about. The other thing that I've kind of had a front row seat to watching is the rise of resort wear. And you might not realize how much this has affected the whole global fashion market, but this all started at Miami Swim Show, where resort wear, it became something that you would wear not just to the beach, you would wear it out to dinner. And this aesthetic came out of the swim shows for a long time. And that turned into athleisure wear, which you guys are seeing. And this whole working from home thing with sweatpants and coveralls. And it's just fascinating to see the whole evolution of it and to have covered it during that time that I've been covering swim show. And I've covered it, the actual swim show convention at the convention center has been around for decades. And I've only covered that since 2000, but I've covered what Christina did for IMG. That I started with that from the very beginning. And now that's in transition, not just because of COVID, but people are, like she spoke about last week, people are trying to decide now if it's worth having a fashion show because it's a lot of money. So a lot of brands, even big ones, are wondering if it's worth their time and energy. Some other things I do for my job are I have to find emerging designers. You guys probably use Instagram all the time to find this, and that's a good way, but a lot of it's word of mouth and pounding the pavement. I've found designers in the most random ways, and it's always about kind of looking through the rack or just making a circle of one more time to small boutiques or something to find that one gem that hasn't been written about, because in my profession, you're always trying to find an exclusive, and if it's done to death, it's old news. So you're really trying to find some new things. The other thing is, like in places like Arizona and Miami, I'm covering when a major brand or designer comes to town. Like I've interviewed everyone from Donna Karan to Karl Lagerfeld, Diane von Furstenberg, because these people have to go in and check in on their stores, or they might be doing a fashion show for a charity. And so it's my job to go interview these people. And one of the important things I don't think people realize about when you're a journalist, especially a fashion journalist for a big magazine or paper, is you're not just there to write the story, you're also representing your company, you're the face of your company, and they're depending on you to be professional and have manners and have very good conversation skills. These are all really important things. So it's not just about being a good writer or researcher, because you also have to, Women's Wear Daily is based in New York and they don't have anyone in Florida. So they're counting on me to be like their representative. And it's a very important thing. And I see a lot of writers make mistakes in this way and they don't get hired back because they don't do a good job. They might be the most incredible writer ever, and they don't do a good job at the public relations side of it. And it's kind of like being a diplomat, and it's important, how you dress and how you behave, and people don't forget these things, and it's how you get hired back, especially in such a competitive market right now. And then the other thing, when you're in fashion, you're not just writing about the clothes, but you're writing about who's wearing them and where. So there's a lot of stories I write about, like about what's the hot restaurant and what's the big charity gala, or are people going to the horse races this season? And I have to write about the high society and the celebrities who are wearing those pieces. And it used to be more high society, but now it's a lot, that's a much more democratic approach. So you're seeing a lot of celebrities of all types, even people coming out of TikTok can be a celebrity overnight, and that's important to a brand. So I talked a little bit about my process to you guys, but a lot of editors I talk to, sometimes they get their stories just from Instagram, but the problem with that is everyone's looking on the same Instagram. So like I said, the best ways to get a scoop are word of mouth and pounding the pavement. They're really old fashioned, but like, I'll give you guys an example. Let's say a boutique's opening or a new restaurant, and of course you're going to see that on Instagram. But even before that, I might be in a neighborhood and I'll see a sign up that says something's coming soon. And maybe the developer put it up, not even the person who leased the space. And then I might get a scoop because I found out about that business way before anyone else did, but way before the shop or the restaurant put it on Instagram. So you really just want to get out into the community. And like when I come to Arizona, I walk every neighborhood, I check in everywhere, I look under every stone, because that's how you find scoops. And I have to tell you guys a funny story about how I started working for the New York Times. Was actually from an Uber ride. It was during a really crowded event, and I had to share an Uber with a woman. We were just standing on the same corner, and we had to get to another event quickly. And so we decided to share this Uber, and we struck up a conversation, and she ended up being a curator at a museum in Nevada. And she was doing this really important project, and I went and covered it. I got the scoop on it because no one else knew about it at that point. And then because I covered that story for Women's Wear Daily, her museum invited me to come look at a very important exhibit that was a groundbreaking artist from the early 20th century. And I pitched it to the New York Times, and that's how I ended up getting my first piece in the New York Times. So you just never know where opportunity is going to come from, and you just might be an Uber ride away from meeting someone who could become your employer or someone who could give you the biggest scoop of your life. I've also gotten some of my biggest scoops from like shuttle bus drivers. Like I'll ask them, who have you seen today? What's going on? And you just never know what people are going to say. Like doormen, they know a lot of things. And so keep your eyes and ears open all the time, because you really never know what's going to happen. And I keep in touch with all the developers, because they obviously know who's leasing space. So like I would talk to, say, the Fashion Square people all the time, or the new development that's going on in Paradise Valley, which is the La Pommeraye, what stores are going in there. So the other thing is that Danita always likes me to mention is you have to read all the time. So you're not just going on Instagram and other social media, but it's really important to keep up on newspapers and all sorts of publications, regional magazines, even dinky community newspapers. I mean, I must read at least 20 a day, because that's how I find, more importantly, I find out what's already been written about, because if it's old news. Like I won't pitch the New York Times something that's already been written, because they want an exclusive. They want something that hasn't been run yet. First, they want it for the first time. But so I wanted to quote a New York Times editor said this about, like if you want to get, like she accepts a lot of freelance work in the New York Times. And people asked her, well, if you're a freelancer, how do you get in the New York Times? And this is what she said. The best advice is to just think about your own special body of knowledge. Tell me about a designer, a trend I don't know about. Obviously, we can't be aware of what's happening all around the world. So I really love hearing about stuff I don't know about. I mean, even the New York Times can't be everywhere. So if you guys are out, even in the smallest town in Arizona, and you find the coolest thing, you never know that you could get a story. And I have seen really young people get stories in the New York Times. I mean, sometimes right out of college or even in college, you just never know. So I also wanted to talk about how much the industry has changed since when I started with fashion journalism. So it kind of cracks me up, because when I was at places like Atlanta Magazine, writing about fashion was really boring. It was just about the physical aspects of the clothes. Like you would say, 3/4 length sleeves are all the rage this season, or, the hemlines, it's a mini, it's a maxi. And it really was just about that. Like you would even just go to a store and write about the basics. I can't believe now, looking back through my clips, how basic things were. And it's changed so much. And you guys know this, like, it used to be that fashion shows, only people who were in the trade, so like buyers, or maybe some society people would go and look at the collection. But like if you look at old pictures, it's really fun to Google. I don't know if you've Googled Coco Chanel's fashion shows, but she used to have them in her store on the Rue Cambon in Paris, which is a very small space. And she had this spiral staircase, and the models would come down the staircase, and there would be a small group of people crammed in there, maybe some buyers, maybe some society ladies who could afford her tweed boucle suits. And that was it. But now, fashion shows have become a spectacle and everyone's invited. But when I started, it was still there were no celebrities in the front row. There were no hip hop people or bloggers, or it was all just like, are you a buyer for Neiman Marcus, or are you someone who buys couture all the time? Then you would be in the front row. But and it was before celebrity stylists and all of that. Now, fashion shows are, of course, online because of COVID, but they were going online long before that, because, as I said, they're so expensive that a lot of people are just doing digital presentations now. I get a lot of digital lookbooks, and you guys, I think, know what a lookbook is. It's where you photograph your collection. Instead of sending a hard copy now, they just send digital. But which I think is great because it doesn't waste paper, and also it cuts down travel expenses. But it will be interesting to see after COVID if people are just dying to get back to having the real life experience, or if we're just going to get used to living this digital life like we're having this Zoom call right now. So yeah, so that's how, when it started, you know, I was just writing about the physical parts of it, but now it's crazy what fashion journalism's become. It's totally the opposite. In fact, it hardly ever really has to do with fashion. So I'm just going to go through, I think the reason I'm focusing so much on the New York Times today is it's really accessible for you guys to go and look up these stories so you can research what I'm talking about. So let's just, a lot of times what's happening now is they're writing about business, which never would have happened before, because you'd think, well, why does the general public care about the business of fashion? And I don't know why, but they feel it's necessary to tell people about, like, if there's a big merger and acquisition, like how LVMH bought Tiffany and Company, and there was this whole fight over the sale of it because before COVID, LVMH promised one price and then they came back with a lower price and Tiffany said, no, we're not taking it. And there was this big fight. But this was all in the New York Times style section. This would have never happened before. And then I don't know if you guys know about this skatewear brand called Supreme, but it was just bought by a humongous company called VF Corporation, which owns really big brands like North Face and Vans. So the New York Times wrote about, can Supreme stay cool while going corporate? Well, usually the public never really cared who owned the brand. They like whatever they like. They like Supreme. They never thought about who owns Supreme. But now this has become big fashion news, not just for Women's Wear Daily, but for places like the New York magazine's The Cut, which is their fashion section, or even Town and Country and Vogue are writing about all these things. It's not just like a consumer magazine anymore or a trade journal. They've blended, and they're all writing about these big business issues. Before, like, you would only know who owned a label if their name was on the label, like Yves Saint Laurent or Armani. Now the New York Times is covering, like, if a brand has a new creative director, and you know the turnover these days is so high, so that could be every year someone's getting a new creative director, they're covering it. And so it's just really interesting. The other thing that fashion journalism has become about is huge lifestyle trends, what's part of the national conversation, the zeitgeist. And I want to say something that Vanessa Friedman, who's the main fashion critic for the Times, she said there's a misconception of being a fashion journalist. It's more about having a responsibility of reporting on fashion as a cultural beacon within a global environment. So basically she's saying what I just said is, it's not just about, is something 3/4 sleeves anymore, or is it all about brocades? You have to have some meaning now to your story, or else the chances of getting it printed aren't very high. But let me give you an example. I don't know if you guys watch Bridgerton. She compared like the excesses of that to the couture week that just happened in Paris. She said Bridgerton has nothing on couture. Now, in this article, this is just one review, mind you, she mentions the development of technical fabrics, inclusiveness, the biomorphic movement, which is like Iris van Herpen's pieces, where she's making, it means when you're making clothes or a design that looks like something in nature. Third wave feminism, sustainability. These are all mentioned heavily within one review. So she's not like in the old days when I was writing about things about hemlines. she's going into all these things. This would have been unheard of before. Another big thing, and I know you guys study this a lot with Danita, is sustainability. I mean, it seems like every other day the New York Times is printing something on sustainable fashion. That is a huge topic that doesn't seem to be going away and is only getting bigger. And what she said about that is she's been reporting on that since 2009, so it's not so new. It's the same as any issue in any other sector. You're looking at what these broad social movements are, political, cultural, and social change, and how it applies to your sector. Fashion is in the world, and therefore what happens in the world shapes it. So it's really interesting. It's gone from being so frivolous and just being about something pretty or feminine to like, these are some real issues. They have to factor in the environment and social injustice. And you have to think of those things when you're writing fashion stories now and come up with angles and really be on top of things and know your major news topics. You can't just know about fashion these days. You have to know about everything. I mean, there's really a lot that they expect from you. So she also talks about how she wants you have to be part of the conversation that's happening online. So now that extends to social media. And she also says that sometimes it's better not to react immediately because you want to step back and let it kind of play out a little and then draw your own conclusion. So we all know people who've jumped the gun on Twitter and they said something they might not want to. So it's better to digest everything and then come back with your own ideas about it. Really think about a collection and mull it over. Mind you, during Fashion Week, you don't have that much time because your review is due within minutes. It's the speed to market now is so intense that you used to have a week or so to write these things, and now they want it right away. But I'm talking about bigger trends. She said, kind of like think about it a little and think about what your opinion is on it before you jump in the game. So some of the things that when I talk about like the bigger trends, one of the New York Times articles recently was, what does it mean to look like a mom? And that was in response to the Wall of Mom movement that happened in Portland with the protesters, where the moms lined up and they were protecting the protesters. This is in the style section. You would have never seen this 20 years ago. The other thing that I think fashion's gotten, this is just kind of crazy, but it's gotten into these really random topics. Like they're really stretching sometimes because they're trying to think of new things. And there's a reporter who they just hired who came from, you guys probably have heard of her, Jessica Testa, and she's an ASU grad. She went to the journalism school there. And she has written articles on auctioning off a dead mall. So she came to Arizona and she went to one of the malls in your city that is abandoned now. And she wrote a story on these people who go around and it's like a cult obsession where they're obsessed with abandoned malls and now they're collecting things in the malls, like things that are just junk that you would think, why would you want that? But these people are obsessed with it. So that's just an example of like a really weird topic that got a huge page in the Times, and you'd think, why is this important? But they're just trying to do stuff that's new and different. And then like another thing she wrote about was this brand called the Period Company, which is like a new period underwear, like that you wear during your period. And she is, just talking about some topics that are kind of like taboo that they're bringing into the, light that were kind of not talked about before, but she's really stretching it as far as like what you're considering fashion journalism. So what I wanted to talk about is like how you get a job. So Jessica got her job she became the Times fashion reporter. She's not the critic, she's a reporter in 2019. And I wanted to read this to you guys because you have to understand, one of the most coveted jobs in the world. So many applicants, because there aren't that many newspapers left, and magazines, even Vogue is struggling these days. So these jobs are so rare. And I wanted to read this to you because it's something to think about when you're going through your job process. Says the New York Times has a new staff writer on its styles desk, plucked from an unlikely place. Jessica Testa started at BuzzFeed in 2012 and departed earlier this year when BuzzFeed News shuttered its national desk. So she was out of a job. She's written about cold case DNA crime solvers, child marriage laws, and women framed for crimes they didn't commit. It says nothing to do with fashion. But the style section editor joked, none of this will prepare her for the fashion industry. So he's just talking about how cutthroat fashion is and how the reputation, of being such a vicious industry. So he's saying she's writing about murders and everything. That's perfect. That she'll do great in fashion. So Vanessa Friedman, the Times fashion director and chief fashion critic, said that she was attracted to Jessica for her experience as a reporter rather than her experience with fashion. So it's better to be a good reporter. And she says, what was important to us in her experience as a reporter, as a writer, as part of the team, and all of that is really stellar. So she's looking for someone who can be a team player, who has incredible, impeccable reporting skills, which are not easy to come by these days. A lot of people are sloppy, don't fact check, and just go by what's on the press release. And I can't tell you how many times the press release is incorrect. And a lot of times even the CEO of the company is giving you incorrect information. So you have to triple check your facts. You can't just go based on what one person says or writes. And also, when people write, they shouldn't look online to fact check, because most of what's online is misinformation. Even the other day I saw a mistake in New York Magazine. So even big publications have mistakes. And she said about Jessica that we had an amazing pool of applicants, and it was a really difficult decision and took a long time. But in the end, we just thought it was a really interesting proposition. Jessica was someone who would definitely bring a fresh point of view and a very deep skill set to the team. So before Jessica started at BuzzFeed, she handled breaking news at the Arizona Republic. And as I said, she graduated with a journalism major from ASU. So I recommend all of you to reach out to her. If you go to New York, I would definitely see if you could meet with her, and maybe she'd even give you a tour of her workplace, or maybe she'd let you come on a story with her. But if you're really serious about journalism, that is an incredible contact to have. I mean, that to have someone from Arizona go to a international publication like the New York Times is so rare, and you guys should definitely take advantage of it. And I wanted to go into how I got my job. I was looking up, I looked up a ton of people, not from Women's Wear Daily and from other people I've known, and they mostly got jobs in two ways. One was just cold calling. I know that sounds crazy, but sometimes you just catch someone at the right minute and they need someone. I remember I'm not a food critic, but when I was really young, we had an emergency at one of my newspapers, and the food critic was in the hospital, and I was sitting there, and my editor needed that story, and he sent me out to do it. I was about 24 years old, and I did a good job with it. So he let me keep writing them until the person came back to work. And then the person never came back to work. So guess what? I became a food critic of a big, kind of like what would be the New Times in Phoenix. It was in Atlanta. And I became the food critic out of the blue, which I never expected, but sometimes, that just happens. So I got my job at Women's Wear Daily through a stylist. She and I styled together at Atlanta Magazine. She was really great. She came from Women's Wear Daily in New York, moved to Atlanta. She worked with a lot of big brands. She was freelance. And she still works today. I mean, she's great. But she recommended me. They needed a writer in Atlanta. And, so it's all about who you know. So those are the two ways you get jobs. The most from the people I looked up is cold calling. Just see if they need anyone, and or someone. There's a lot of nepotism in this business, and I want to be really honest with you guys that if you look at the masthead of most of the national publications, you're going to recognize a lot of names on there as far as, famous people's children or people who are in the industry's children. And that's just a fact of any industry you go into. It doesn't matter if you're in finance or in Hollywood doing films, there's going to be a certain degree of nepotism. And I didn't have any connections. My parents and my parents' friends, no one ever was in publishing. And it's been a lot harder for me. It's been harder for me to get jobs and get in the door. Then also, I didn't grow up in New York City. That helps because you have your network, and the media, not so much now, but especially then all the media was for the US was based in New York. And it really hurts your chances if you don't have that built-in network. You have to hustle harder, you have to be smarter, and you have to, I always say you can never hurt to ask. What the most they could say is no. So it's better to ask and be denied than what if you miss that opportunity. But I've never been afraid to ask for something, because if I don't, it's not going to happen. I just don't have the built-in infrastructure like the people and the families that these other kids had to get in the business.
Bex, can I jump in and ask you a quick question? So in terms of getting that first job, your foot in the door, you already had a 4-year degree and an English degree. Why did you feel it was necessary to then go and get a master's in journalism as opposed to just sort of to just using the 4-year degree as your jumping off point? I mean, do you think that it was important, and is it important now?
Yeah, I would have done it differently. See, when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to be yet. Now I would go to ASU and get an undergraduate degree in journalism. But then I didn't know. And that's the great thing about college, though. Like I said, you figure out what you want to do. Economically, it makes more sense to figure that out in college versus going to grad school.
So you don't necessarily suggest that somebody needs a master's degree to go into journalism or fashion journalism specifically? But
no, Jessica Testa just had an undergraduate degree.
So, do you think it would be helpful to have like a history of fashion minor or take some of those classes so that as you were talking about Vanessa Friedman's reviews, you talk about how she really intersperses all of these ideas about Iris and just all of these different designers who maybe you wouldn't know of if you hadn't already been working in the industry for 20 plus years. So the idea of having like some sort of fashion history background, would you suggest that as a way to help move your career along?
Well, any knowledge helps. But like Vanessa said, she hired Jessica because Jessica had the most incredible reporting skills. So if you truly want to be a journalist, regardless of what the subject is, you have to have good journalism skills first and foremost. Then you can learn any subject. You know, I didn't know anything about fashion when I started, except what any young woman in America might know by enjoying shopping or watching movies, like Breakfast at Tiffany's. But you learn on the way. The most important thing is to be a good writer, you know, have great grammar, because that also will cost you a job. I remember when I started at Women's Wear Daily, an editor told me that they kept working with me because they did not have to correct my stories. If you had 3 errors, they wouldn't hire you again, because they don't have time. These people are working really hard. They're doing the jobs of 3, 4 people, and they just don't have, especially now with downsizing, they don't have the time to correct your copy. So I think it's better to have good English skills and journalism skills, and then you can learn about fashion. But if you have the advantage, like you guys do, to learn both, because you have the ASU has the most incredible journalism school and fashion school, especially with someone like Danita, who is like a Wikipedia of fashion. She knows everything. You could have the best of both worlds, and then you're really ahead of the game.
Sure. So let's just take another second here and talk about what are the jobs of the different titles at a publication. So you're a freelance journalist, and you did a great job letting us know what that is. But you know, who is it that that corrects your copy? Who assigns you the you know, your stories? Can you give us like a little breakdown of who's who at a publication so that we understand, you know, the different roles?
Well, there are editors and then there are writers. Editors are usually staff. I never wanted to be an editor because then you are just sitting at a desk all day and you're editing other people's copy. I wanted to be out in the field, getting the story and reporting and meeting people and going to all these interesting places and traveling the world. But there are different types of editors. Like I said, I've never worked in-house except for TV, so I'm not exactly sure what everyone does. I work at Women's Wear Daily. I work with the executive editor, so he's at the very, very top of, the only person above him is the owner of the publication. But there are editors for every market. So like at Women's Wear Daily, we have a denim market editor, accessories, innerwear, which is lingerie, outerwear. So there are editors for everything. And then there are people who edit like special sections, like if they're doing a special theme. But like at a magazine like Vogue, there are people who edit stories, there are people who edit photo shoots, there are market editors who go to showrooms, and like, let's say you're the, you know, accessories market editor, you go all over New York City visiting jewelry designers or going to LA and you look at all their pieces and you pick out what's going to be featured. So that's the great thing, is there are all these different jobs out there, and a lot of like everything is becoming the gig economy. So I think you're going to see a lot more people having to be freelance, whether they like it or not, because hiring people full time is so expensive because they have to pay people's benefits. And so like, for example, Women's Wear Daily had one of the last remaining real fashion critics in the world, and they just let her go very recently, and she'll probably still contribute to the paper, but she just won't be on staff. So it's very sad, but that's just the reality of the situation now.
And I mean, you know, obviously talking, you know, you don't have to speak in complete specifics, but ranges. What are the financial benefits of being a fashion journalist these days? I mean, you know, you put in your time at a 4-year degree and pay X amount, and then what what is a starting salary? Where can you go? What, what are you allowed to have as, like, I know that there are some publications that allow gifts, some publications that don't. Could you talk a little bit about the, the salary range, and then what are some perks or cons of working in this environment?
Well, it's like a lot of journalism. It's very low. And that's once again why you see in the masthead a lot of people come from wealth already. So they're not doing these jobs for the money. They're doing them because they can afford to do these fun jobs or interesting jobs. Like at Women's Wear Daily, one of the heiresses to Nordstrom is one of our writers. And but you see that a lot. And the salaries are very low. I wouldn't say that hardly anyone makes over $120,000 a year. And I'd say maybe the bulk of it is like between 50,000 and 90,000. And in New York City, that doesn't go a long way. It's very tough. And that's why you see most people who are independently wealthy doing these jobs. And I wanted to read another thing that a former colleague of mine, who's now the communications director at CFDA, he said this, and this kind of talks about the financial aspects of it, Cece. You have to have a real passion for it, because chances are you won't be financially rewarded the way many other sectors are, like the financial world. You will work long hours and often travel and be away from home a lot. I wanted to talk about that. The travel seems like a dream job, but you really have to be someone who's willing to not have a life. It's very hard to, you're never home. You're living out of a suitcase. You're staying in hotels. Sometimes you wake up, you don't know where you are, and it's a real thing. And that life is not for everyone. You can't have a dog, or if you do, you better have a roommate who can take care of it. And it's very hard to date and have a relationship. And it's been a big sacrifice, and you have to really be willing to do that. So he goes on to say, there will often be no big financial reward that compensates for this, so you must do it for passion. And then he says, my advice to young people is to be prepared to work really hard and always believe in yourself and your love for the industry. Always know that there are many wonderful people who will help you. And that's the truth. It's like, there are good and bad in everywhere. And there are some people in fashion who are not going to help you, but then there are a lot of people like me. I've gotten so many people jobs, and there are just some people who are just nice, and then there are some people who are out for themselves, but that's in the industry. And he said, to quote Diane von Furstenberg, fear is not an option. And it's really true. I mean, you can't be scared to just go out there in the world and be alone a lot. I mean, even though you're around all these people, at the end of the day, you're alone. And it's kind of hard being on the road that much. But if you're a fashion critic, that's what it's going to take, or a fashion writer. I mean, traveling a lot. Is there anything else you want to ask real quick, Cece? Because I just wanted to go over some other quick things.
No, you go, and then I'll ask and then go through some of these questions with you. So please finish.
Yeah. So when I was talking to you guys before about how you should take advantage of having Jessica as a contact, I mean, your school is a big feeder market into these jobs. And I just want you to know, like, I looked at Women's Wear Daily. Almost everyone who works there graduated from FIT, Boston College, Brown, or Boston University. Why these schools, I don't know. But I'm just telling you that a lot of it has to do with like networking. Like maybe Boston College has, an editor might meet with you because you went to a certain school. So not because it's a better school, it's just because they're familiar with it. It's like anything in life, people like familiarity. So I just, I looked at it and that it was really interesting to see how many people went to those schools. I wanted to talk to you about how most of the people I looked at who don't write for Women's Wear Daily, like Jessica, didn't want to be fashion journalists. They never set out to be a fashion journalist. It just randomly happened. And I think that's really interesting too. So going back to Vanessa Friedman, who's the fashion critic for the New York Times, she started off as a freelance writer and then she worked at the Financial Times. And the only reason she got a job in fashion at the Financial Times was a mistake. Someone saw Vogue on her resume and just assumed she wrote about fashion, but she didn't. She was writing about art. And they hired her because they were desperate and they needed someone to write a story about boots. And that's how she landed her first gig. So it's kind of like how I became a food critic. It just happened. So then she says, she never intended to write about fashion. She stumbled into the role. And she became the New York Times fashion critic in 2014. And I just wanted to read you guys some things she said because, I was going to talk, do my own thing, but I think she just really says it all. And I just want to share it with you. She said, career paths, the way they used to exist, don't exist anymore. And we all know this. It's both scary and confusing, but it's also an incredible opportunity. It's like, look at me. How did I get to the New York Times? Uber. That's what she's talking about is like, yeah, the old ways don't work anymore, but maybe you're going to share an Uber ride with someone and that's how it's going to happen for you. It really means you can do so much more because all the strictures that used to exist around sectors and industries are breaking down. So she's saying it's not a good old boys club anymore. Jessica Testa would have never gotten a job like she did a while ago because she wasn't in the, the New York media industry world. She's an outsider. And she says that college taught me how to think, how to research, and how to write and construct an argument, which is effectively what you do whenever you're writing any form of criticism for a newspaper. She didn't even major in English. She was a history major. And she talks about how Kate Betts, who was a huge editor, she still contributes to CNN, but you guys might know her. She used to be the editor of Harper's Bazaar, but she was a history major at Princeton too. Has nothing to do with English, journalism, or fashion. And then when she was asked, they asked Vanessa, like, what is your, advice for people who want to do what you do? And she said, learn about everything else first. Just be open to whatever happens and don't assume that you're limited by your choices. You never know where things are going to lead. And the most important thing is to get the most experience. So all this stuff that you might think doesn't mean anything, it could change your life. You never know, like someone might need something on a subject that you might happen to know about, or you're just in the right place at the right time. So do you want to start questions?
Yeah, let me start asking you some of the questions that people have asked. Megan writes, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on influencers and bloggers. Do you think fashion journalists, sorry, I can't read today. Do you think fashion journalism is being overtaken by blogs and social media?
Yes. I don't know if you guys read my bio, but Craigslist is one of the reasons that newspapers are suffering because they took the want ad section and that was newspapers' main source of revenue. And when you have publications like Vogue competing with social media and blogs, why is someone going to read Vogue when they can read the designer's Instagram or the designer's friend's Instagram or the Rihanna who went to the designer's show? By the time the Vogue story comes out, it's been written about to death. It's been like everyone knows the new shoe or the new hotline so far in advance that I do think it's having a major impact on journalism. That's why you're seeing in the New York Times, they're writing about malls and period underwear and mom wear, because if they just wrote about straight up fashion, that's old news.
Let me just ask you sort of an offshoot of this. And when you talk about when they decide that they want to write about something, what makes a trend? How do you decide that this wasn't just some sort of, crazy off the beaten path story versus something that it is now a real trend that needs to be written about?
Are you talking about like social trends and movements, like I was talking about, like sustainability, or are you talking about like colors and styles and patterns?
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, sustainability, as you said, is something that people have been talking about since, the early 2000s, but it's only now really become such a big framework of, our conversation because it feels like it's right on top of us, um, the repercussions of it. But I think more in a pop lifestyle fashion moment. So if, how do you know that, um, you know, uh, mom jeans are a thing, or had, when does it become a trend? How pervasive does it need to be in your world for you to realize that this is something that the rest of the world needs to know about? That
Well,
you need to write
it's
an
all
article
about
about?
data. I mean, it's just like if you're a psychologist and you're doing any type of story, or like if someone's trying to study demographics, if you start seeing it a lot, now you might see, is it happening a lot on Instagram? Is it happening a lot at the trade show you're attending? Like if you're looking at 2,500 swim lines and everyone has a cheetah print, you're gonna say, okay, it's all about the cheetah now. Or is it all about the high-rise bottom, high-rise waist? So it's really just about seeing a great deal of product, and that's where focusing on a subject really helps, because, and that's why Women's Wear Daily has market editors, because they've seen everything. This is all they look at all day long, and they can identify, obviously they know much more than someone who's just coming in randomly and has never looked at this industry. And that's why it's important to have continuity and have people covering the same things, so that and also they get to know the public relations people and the brands, and they know the ins and the outs, and they can get insider information quicker than they might know things, before they're made public. So that's how it is to be a journalist, is becoming an expert in what you're talking about.
And so when this is a question from Zachary, when you're looking, through for a small boutique to feature, what qualities do you look for?
Aesthetics and having an eye, and really having a message. I mean, there are so many boutiques, and I like to find someone who really has a definitive look and curates the selection, and also makes the shopper's life easier. I mean, why do we all go to boutiques? They're helping us think about all the stuff they're looking at so that you don't have to. I don't know about you guys, but I get exhausted looking online. Like, I have to buy a pair of winter boots, and I wish someone could just look at 400 pairs of boots for me and pick out the 12 good ones, and then I don't have to think about it. But I'm also looking for people who are trying to pioneer new neighborhoods, and create a sense of community. So even if, like, let's say I might not like the fashions they have because it's not my style, that doesn't mean they're bad. It's just not my style. But I still might write about them because I think what they're doing is really cool. And I mean, you guys have seen in Phoenix, which is a huge city, there are always like these new neighborhoods coming up and cool things going on. And that has a lot to do with like the restaurants and the shops. And they create a vibe. So I'm also looking for that.
Great. Let's see. Next question. So Ashley would like to know, how do you avoid feeling burnout, and what do you do when you do feel it?
Well, as someone who, has to sit a lot in front of a computer all day, you have to get up. You guys know this, though, after being in Zoom your whole semester now. I obviously try to take little breaks, but my big thing every day is, and it's funny because this is becoming trendy, even though you'd think, how could that be trendy, is just taking a walk. It's an amazing thing. Gwyneth Paltrow's doing it now. There are walking groups starting all over the country because people are realizing how great it is to just get out sometimes. It doesn't matter if you have 15 minutes, but I take long walks. I hike a lot. And that's why I love Arizona too, is it's a great hiking place. And that's how I clear my mind. And I would be burned out. You can't just read and write forever. You'll go crazy. But there are sometimes you have to, if you have deadlines, you just have to do it. But I do try to reward myself with walks. Some people do yoga, but I prefer to get out in fresh air. And also when you're walking, you might find a story.
So that actually that brings me to a question from Sydney, who asks, with everything locked down and socially distant, has it been more difficult for you to find news stories?
It's more difficult because what I do is very heavily travel based. I mean, I also forgot to mention I'm a travel writer. So I had a lot of stories lined up that are on hold. The good thing is they're on hold. I can still do them when this is all over. They weren't based on like a timely event or anything, but I haven't, it's hard, even in Miami, which I'm very blessed. Miami is the kind of city, and like Phoenix too, where it didn't shut down totally. So a lot of new things have opened. So I have been doing some stuff, but nothing on the level of what it's normally like. So during this time, I'm still writing, but I'm doing other things, like I wrote someone's website, or I wrote someone's speech she had to give, or I write people's bios. And so when you're a writer, you don't just have to do journalism, you can write about anything. And that's how I've been getting by because the regular journalism it's still happening, but I'd say it's at half of what it normally is. And then when it gets ramped up again, I'll be living out of a suitcase and on the road.
So you think that so after COVID, you'll go back to normal? There's a question of, is there anything different that would happen with your job after COVID? But you think it'll go back to the normal way of doing business?
I think we're going to have a shift though. Like I think a lot of things are going to be available digitally. I don't know about you guys, but I love having the option. Like I love being able to go to a theater in Chicago online. I love watching things, like going to an art exhibit in London I couldn't normally go to. Obviously it's better to see things in person, but you can't be everywhere all the time. And I'd rather have that digital option. The other thing I'm seeing a lot is multi-brand stores are going away. A lot of things now are direct to consumer, or the brand just opens up their own retail store. So I'm still going to be writing about retail. I just think it's going to change. But everyone has a store now. I mean, I don't know where these people get the money, but it's like they can't stop opening stores. Even with all the bankruptcies, new stores are coming up. So things close, but new ones come along.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah. So let's flip that to actually reviewing collections. We have a question here that is, do you believe short films will remain a popular form of presenting collections in a post-COVID world? What is your take on, the digital still being prevalent as opposed to going back into doing full on, in-person runway?
Well, I think it's just people will have a certain budget and they're going to put their money where they want. Some people might want to spend 10,000 on a fashion show, and some people might want to make a short film. I want you guys, there's this really great guy to look up. His name's Brian Phillips. And Cece, you know him, right?
Mhm.
Public relations.
Yep.
So he had this huge agency in New York called Black Frame. And he represented a lot of major fashion houses, European and American. And he could have just done that forever. But he saw this change coming a while ago. And now what he's doing is fashion entertainment. So he's gone to LA and he's doing all, he basically gave away his agency to the people he worked
He
with.
closed it down.
Yeah, and he's doing a totally different thing now because he's realizing that the old way of doing things is no longer existing, and you can't help it if it's going to change, so you might as well get on board. And he's full on into this fashion entertainment movement, and I think it's great. Like I think it's cool that like even when a fashion designer does like a cooking clip, I don't know if you guys watch that. I think that's nice to see that side of them. They're people and they're not just machines who make fashion collections. But I think we're going to see a lot of multimedia, and why not? Like you might even see games, video games. I think it's great.
Yeah. One of the questions somebody had is when you walk into a small boutique and look at the collections that they have, do you find that it's different than seeing it on a runway because there's not a model there to show you how it moves?
Very much so. And in fact, I've seen so many incredible designers hurt by this. And I always tell them, if you could just get someone to put this on, they would see how incredible this design is. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-blown expensive fashion show. Like, for example, you could just hire some models, like even your friends, to just do a very informal modeling, maybe an event, or like have an in-store event. Or I know a designer in Miami who there's this cool boutique hotel and they have a really pretty garden, and she just spent some money on some hair and makeup and a couple models, gave them each $100, and just had them walk around the boutique hotel for an afternoon. And it was so cool. And she got so many sales from it. But I do think it depends on the clothes. I mean, some clothes really do, you have to see them on the body.
And we should clarify that would be direct to consumer sales, not wholesale sales.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But both. Even I've seen it before in a booth at a trade show where a buyer comes in and flips through the rack, and there might be the coolest piece on that rack that I saw, but they can't visualize it. And it's just too bad that the designer didn't have a model in the booth wearing it that second. But most booths do at least hire one model for that reason.
Yeah, no, I think it's always a great idea to do that. I agree with you.
Yeah.
So Alicia asks, when writing, do you try to give smaller brands coverage and exposure as well as the popular brands? And how do you choose whether an emerging designer is worth writing about?
I do, but I get a lot of flack for it from my editors. They make me fight for everything I write about. Like I have to explain to them why it's important. And a lot of times, I mean, I hate to say it, but it has to do with advertising where, you know, why do you think you see so many stories on Chanel? It's because Chanel is a major advertiser, or an LVMH brand. And it's sad, but it's true. Small brands just don't have the ad budget to have any power. With that said, I'd say 25% of the time I can sneak an emerging brand in, and it really makes me happy. And I don't do it though just because they're emerging. It has to be good. If I believe in someone, I think they're doing great stuff and they're going places, I'll definitely write about them. That's my favorite part of the job, is finding the new stuff. I mean, everyone knows Chanel. It's like, who cares?
And I think you answered this, but I like that Alethea thought of this also, is why do fashion writers rely on top designer runways for fashion trend predictions, even though fashion is much more of a trickle up system, which I completely.
And I agree with her. I mean, way before, things coming from the street, we all know that now, but a lot of, I mean, it's a sad fact, but a lot of smaller designers are being copied. And they don't have the money to sue these huge corporations. And I've seen it time and again. I know a designer in Miami who Jeremy Scott copied.
We just talked about Jeremy Scott and his Moschino show.
Yeah. I mean, he copied everything, the colors, the pattern, everything. But doesn't have the money to sue him. But I see that all the time. It's a sad fact. But I do think that young minds and not just young, but like people who are fresh to the industry, maybe because they aren't inundated with this same stuff all the time. They have a fresh, just like any industry, they like a new chef, they might have a fresh approach to cooking that will change things.
Agreed. Sam asks, on your article about COVID and Miami Swim Week, it talks about how digital discovery today is absolutely essential. Do you think the idea behind digital discovery will remain prominent in the years ahead when it comes to engagement in the fashion industry?
Well, I didn't write that article. Is he just referring to Women's Wear Daily?
Sam, do you want to unmute yourself? Because I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was, I went on a page and it said it was written by you about COVID and Miami swimwear after. It said it was about on Rebecca KLEINMAN. I could be wrong, but I just.
Oh, you mean you're talking about my last swim show story?
Yes, yeah.
And how it went digital?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're asking if I think it's going to remain digital or go back to in real life?
Yes, like for years ahead after pandemic and everything.
I think it's going to be both. And this is the reason is, first of all, who doesn't want to go to Miami, even in July? Buyers love it. Buyers love it. They look forward to it. And it's like they call it like swim camp because it's like going to your favorite summer camp and seeing all your friends again and going to dinner and having fun. And this for them is also a vacation. So it's not just for work. And they love seeing everything at once and touching and feeling it and seeing it on a model. And you can't replace that. But I think these trade shows and for reorders, like if you're a boutique owner and you can just reorder something through a platform, a digital platform, why not? So I think we're going to have coexist with both. But I do think that people will continue to go to Miami for sure. If anything, that will be the one that survives of all of them.
What about the trade? You think that's true of both the trade show and the fashion show portion, that they will both exist, since we're talking about sustainability and how much easier it is to just see collections online. What are your thoughts about these online platforms like Jour and taking over that as opposed to people having to go and see it?
Well, I think if people have the budget, they're going to go. Mm-hmm. It just might not be in their, I think if they have the choice, they will, but they're with budget cuts, they might not. But I just don't see like the higher end retailers like Net-a-Porter and Matches Fashion. These are all big swim and resort wear buyers. And obviously, to be competitive now, you have to go and, see these things. Also to discover new lines. It's really hard on Jour. I don't know do they know about Jour, Cece?
I'm not sure. It's not something that we've discussed in this class, but Jour is a platform, or I'll have Rebecca talk about it. This
Well,
is her.
it's like a digital marketplace for wholesale, and it's really expensive for brands to join. So like an emerging brand is not going to have the money to go on it. So already if you're a buyer, you're not going to find that one gem of an emerging brand that season because they're not going to be on Jour. That's why you go to these trade shows, is you're obviously buying your existing lines, but you're also trying to find new ones because why do people go shopping? They always want new stuff. It's never enough. New.
So let me just be devil's advocate on that and ask, in this economy, if you're a buyer, do you think that you would be more likely to just buy the brands that are already successful for you rather than take the risk of a new brand that you don't know what their production is like and whether they'll be around the year after? Because it's certainly an investment when you're a buyer. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think during COVID, people didn't have a choice but to do replenishment orders. Because like I said, you can't touch and feel and try on something during COVID. But I think that I know a lot of retailers are not happy about it, and they have complained to me about not finding new lines. And it makes them sad that they're just having to order the stuff they've always ordered, but they're very grateful to have those relationships and to know those lines are solid to get them over till when we can get back to how it used to be.
Right. We only have a few minutes left, and I did really want to touch about your broadcast experience very quickly. If you could just tell us, what you did in the broadcast genre, and then what, obviously you preferred print, but why?
Okay, well, I was not a glamorous on-air person. I was one of the behind the scenes people. And basically that meant I wrote the copy that the broadcasters on air were reading. And it involved a lot of research and phone calls. And the writing to me wasn't as interesting because I'll give you guys an example. And things have changed now. TV's become more sophisticated, but it's still not the same as print. So like when I worked at CNN, I couldn't even use the word carbohydrate because they said that most people would not know what that word meant. So I had to use the word sugar. And it just, the range of subjects and trying to fit something into a 2 to 4 minute clip, it just didn't give me the breadth of the work I wanted to really dive into subjects. If I could do it, I would do long format journalism. Unfortunately, there aren't that many publications that allow it, but I love those really long pieces that you get to really research and teach people something.
And what about podcasts? What are your thoughts about that as sort of a new media?
I think it's great, but it is so glutted. I mean, even if you have the most amazing podcast on the planet, it's so hard because there are so many good podcasts. It's like trying to get your show on Netflix. It's like, oh my gosh, there is so much good content out there. So I think it's wonderful, but it's so hard to get noticed.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is. I personally have been enjoying a few podcasts, the BFF podcast and a few others. So it's something that is new to my life in terms of, but it's nice because, you were talking earlier about how important it is to read and really be aware of what's happening in the industry and around you. And sometimes it's harder to get, to be able to take the time to read it, but podcasts are a really great way to be able to listen to this while you're driving. So it has become a new medium for me in order to be able to get more of that information, because I like to always be bombarded with it. I live it.
Yeah. But I think, and this would be like a good thing to end on, is as much, I mean, I wouldn't go into this business if I didn't love content. I mean, I'm a content junkie. Like I said, I read all these newspapers and I'm constantly looking, but I think like I was talking about my walks, it's really important to clear your mind and to have some downtime away from not just your screen, but any type of intake of information, because how are you going to have any ideas if you don't give yourself that breathing room to come up with your own ideas? If you're just ingesting information, you're not going to create.
That's a wonderful point, a really excellent point. Thank you for,
Sometimes
for
doing nothing is the best thing you could do. That's sometimes when the best ideas come.
Yes, I think a lot of people in this generation, and even though I'm not in it, I'm in that point where it's hard to do nothing. I always have to do something, but you're right. We need to be able to take a step back and just breathe and think. So
yeah, and that's where the great ideas come from.
perfect.
Like maybe you're just sitting in a car looking out the window on an hour-long drive up to Flagstaff. That you might think of the best idea ever.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I just want to make a quick announcement to my students that your papers are due today for last week's assignment. So if you haven't submitted them, I need you to submit them by the end of the day today. And then obviously the reflections about Rebecca will be due a week from today. So everything is on Canvas. If you, on Canva, feel free to email me if you have any questions. And again, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge and expertise. We really, really appreciate it, and hope you'll come back soon.
Yes, I'll see you guys for sure in the fall. If you guys are still at ASU, then I don't know how many of you are graduating, but I'll definitely be out in the fall, and you will see me in person with a more interesting, at least some kind of images.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful week. And again, let's wave thank you to Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Bye.
Good luck.